Ryan Johansen. We haven't had a show together since the NHLPA officially filed the grievance against the Flyers for terminating the contract on Johansen's behalf. Charlie, now this is honestly, I could have asked this with the last one too. When the Flyers acquired Johansen on March 6th, did you ever imagine he would become maybe not a main character, but certainly like a popular recurring character requiring quite a bit of bandwidth? Like it really seemed like they acquired him. It was going to be whatever it was from March 6th to the end of the season. And then as soon as they could, they would buy him out. And then goodbye, Johansen. It has been so much more than that. Did you ever imagine this one?
I have had to read the NHLCBA probably like 20 times because of Ryan Johansen over the last 6 months, however long this saga has been going on for. At least this is interesting. Like the Kolosov thing, just adhere to your contract, man. Like you signed a contract, come adhere to your contract. This is interesting because there is the NHL, NHLPA element to this I find fascinating. And the fact that now the NHLPA is essentially going to war with the NHL because the Flyers and Johansen can't agree on an injury. I find this interesting, but no, this should not have gotten to this point because really what should have happened, and this is the Flyers' frustration very, very clearly, is they traded for Johansen. They didn't want him. They took him on as a cap dump. They wanted to stash him in the AHL for the rest of that season, and then they were going to buy him out. That was always the plan. They always intended to buy him out. Yep. And then Johansen, if he wanted to, could have signed a, 1 year, $900,000 contract with somebody else and continued his career. Okay, he got to play 63 whatever games for a cup contender in Colorado, and now he has to take buses for a month and a half in Allentown, and then he can go continue his career somewhere else. Instead, it's turned into this legal mess because now the NHLPA, which we knew was going to happen, once the Flyers officially terminated the deal, which we found out they did right before main training camp, Danny Briere acknowledged that they had terminated the deal the day after he cleared unconditional waivers. This was back in late August. Once we knew that Briere actually did follow through with terminating the contract using the material breach clause, you knew that the NHLPA was eventually going to file a grievance. The only way they weren't going to file a grievance is if before they filed the grievance, the two sides came to some sort of settlement. Yeah. They didn't. Now the NHLPA is filing a grievance. Like this was always the end game. So that's not the surprise. It was just kind of funny that it happened the same day as the Kolosov stuff got semi-resolved, I guess.
No, that was the comical part is like, oh, a victory for Danny. And here's the other shoe. And like, we'll see, maybe they're both victories. Maybe they're both big fat L's. We have no idea how this thing is going to, how this
it kind of reminded me, I was thinking in my head about the end of, and granted, like it's not a perfect comparison because this one, the Johansen thing was out of Briere's hands. This was something that someone else had to do. But I was thinking about the end of The Godfather when Michael Corleone is just like, today we settle all family business. It just felt like yesterday was today we settle all summer business. All summer business is getting settled today.
And it was like people were tweeting me, Charlie, at 4:00, like, oh, you guys are doing post game? I was looking forward to doing like a show on these two things. And honestly, that would have been nice. So we could then like today focus on the good stuff. But now we have to jam it all into the one. And I have to make you lose your mind in the first 20 minutes of the show.
Well, in fairness, I wouldn't have had time to do a show because I had to write two articles on both of these things. So if you want the details of all this beyond the show, go become a diehard and go to allphly.com. I wrote two very in-depth articles on both the Johansen situation and the quote-unquote resolution to the Alexei Kolosov situation. That's what I was doing most. Even if we would have had a show, like it would have been a struggle for me to get to a 4 p.m. show. But we have obviously the pre and post, so we'll get to the game eventually. But let's talk a little bit more about the Johansen situation.
Yeah, I'll tell you just what cracked me up today, Charlie, is when I'm just putting together the outline, and I'm like, man, for a guy who was never going to play for this organization, at least in the NHL, like the amount of go to allphly.com right now, like Charlie said. I want you to go to the search bar. and just type in Ryan Johansen's name. For a guy who was never going to and will never play a minute for this team, the number of articles Charlie has written and or episodes with his name in the title and or description is astronomical, considering he's not on the team and he was never going to be. It's very goddamn funny. But right now, I find the whole thing interesting, but it seems as if now we're at all right, the next time we hear about this is going to be the conclusion.
Right.
If you had to guess, does the settlement, it's going to be a settlement and probably not an arbiter's decision because they hate that. No, neither side wants precedent. Is the settlement just the buyout? It's 2/3 the money over 2 times the year. Like, that's what it's going to be, right?
That would make sense because that's what the Flyers wanted in the first place. It would be a logical compromise because for the Flyers, it's not even really a compromise. For Johansen, it is because he's risking the possibility of not getting 1 penny of the $8 million he was originally owed. But for the Flyers, they would look at that as, well, we were going to buy him out anyway. So if that's the compromise, then sure, you agreed to what we were going to do anyway if you didn't say you were injured. So to me, that makes the most sense. And you talk about incentives. I made this point in the story. The reason why I think this is ultimately going to be settled, and the reason why I think that this won't get all the way to an arbitrator, is because both sides have incentives to settle. You look at it both from the NHLPA side, the NHLPA and Johansen. The NHLPA is incentivized to settle this because the last thing they want is to take it to an arbitrator and lose. Because if they take it to an arbitrator and lose, then there is a legal precedent set that other teams can tear up contracts if they disagree with a guy's injury. The NHLPA does not want that. They want this to be a one-time thing, no precedent setting. This was a unique set of circumstances because of a unique set of facts and whatever. That's their idea. So they're incentivized to settle this. Johansen is also incentivized to push them to settle this because if it goes to an arbitrator and he loses, he gets $0 out of $8 million. And that seems like a lot of money to risk losing on a set of principles. So he's incentivized to want to settle this. The Flyers are incentivized to want to settle this because they don't need to outright win this for this to be worth their time. Yes, it would be great if the entire $4 million is wiped away from their cap. That gives them more cap flexibility. It basically ensures that they have almost no chance of going over the cap with a bonus overage at the end of the year. So that would be the dream. The dream would be they win this and they get the $4 million completely erased. But in order to get far enough under the cap, they don't need to tap into long-term injured reserve and risk having that big bonus overage from Mishkov's contract. They only need to chop off about $2 million off of his salary. That's all they really need to do. So they are very incentivized to say, yeah, let's come to a settlement. Let's just have it be the exact same way it would have been if we would have been allowed to buy you out this past summer. So I see in this scenario, unless one side, or I guess in theory, both sides, unless both sides are being very, very hard-headed on this, it doesn't make any sense to me that this wouldn't be ultimately resolved. The question is, how long is it going to take? And that, to me, is the big outstanding question, because there are some that get resolved in a month and a half. You know, you have the Mike Richards one where that was resolved about 60 days after the initial situation. Then you have things like the Evander Kane one. And if you remember, I mean, I didn't explain the Mike Richards one because everybody remembers that. He was a former Flyer. It wasn't with the Flyers, but he was a notable player. The Evander Kane one was basically Evander Kane lied on his COVID restriction sheet. He said he had a vaccine that he really didn't. And then he reported anyway, and they found out about it. So that was material breach because, like, you straight up, like, bore false witness on written statements. Okay, that took like 180 days to resolve. Now, do I think this is going to take half a year? Probably not. But the precedent tells you that it could. So this could like last until early next summer in theory. I don't think it will, but it could. Can't rule out that possibility.
Yeah, like thinking about that Evander Kane situation, like that could be all sorts of things. Like that could be insurance fraud, you know? Like if they're trying to put the bubble together or whatever, and it's like, yeah, man, everyone's insured, and you said you did this, and so we'll see. Maybe it's this shit. Damn. I've been trying so hard. It's just this team is so freaking ridiculous, man, that this is what we're dealing with. This is who they are. And maybe it's always going to be this nuts, Charlie.
Probably.
But it is interesting how this could play out. And I'll tell you, I think who's running Nashville now? Is it Trotz? Who was like,
Trotz,
yeah, we just got to sit here and wait. I would love to get him in. Like, I don't know, man. I might have $4 million. I'm completely out of the loop on this. No idea. Like, the Nashville Predators are just sitting there like, we're on the hook for 50% of this. That would be really cool if they just threw this contract out. Like, there's so many ripple effects of this thing that it's actually a pretty interesting situation. But I assume the next time we hear about it, it's going to be like, all right, and this is the conclusion.
Yeah, and they settle, and then what will probably happen is the Flyers will have some sort of cap hit on their books for Johansen, but probably not the whole thing. I would assume if it starts getting close to an arbitrator, because there's a lot of hoops, and I went through them all in the article I wrote on allphly.com. There's a lot of hoops, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of briefs that are going to have to be filed before you even get to the point where an arbitration hearing is scheduled. And then you have to wait another month before the hearing can happen, and you have to wait possibly another month for the decision to come out. So there's so many things that would have to happen before an arbitrator even gets a hold of this. But I would assume that if it gets close to that point, we'll start hearing that it's getting close to that point, because those are the types of things where, like, the Elliot Friedmans and the Chris Johnsons just, they're buzzed with the NHL front office, not the front office, the NHL league office. And they're going to hear like, yeah, the hearing is scheduled for May 10th. And then we'll know. And then I guess it comes down to whether deadlines will spur action. But there's just so many unknowns and so many variables in terms of the scheduling of this that I do think it very well might be as simple as we might wake up one day in early December and we find out that they came to a settlement, and now we know exactly what the cap charge for Ryan Johansen for this year and maybe next year is going to be.
Wild. The idea of it coming down to an arbitrator, and like as it's getting close, they're going to be like, all right. I just think of Hexy and Braden Shen in arbitration, and the dude's coming in the room and they go, wait, hold on. I think we got it. And they come to the conclusion, like with the dude waiting outside the door, basically. And maybe that's what happens here. Like it comes all the way down to that, but we will see. All right.
We all silly like the mayor.